You are about to listen to an episode that deals with AI and the nationalization of AI by the US. Since we recorded that episode very soon after, the US relaxed its rules on export controls of AI for non-US users. So bear that in mind when you're listening to the episode. Thank you. You are listening to The Big Tech Show with Adrian Weckler, sponsored by Deal. Deal lets you hire, manage, pay, and equip anyone, anywhere. Visit DEEL.com/bigtech. A guy called Leopold Aschenbrenner, he raises this idea of the nationalization of artificial intelligence. Are we now looking at the Americans essentially trying to nationalize AI, the frontier models, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, whoever is based in the States? Is that what's happening here?
What I'd say about that is that essay series is called Situational Awareness. It's broken into a bunch of different essays. And he seems to have gotten most things correct so far.
Hello and you're welcome to The Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now this month, the US ordered Anthropic to cease allowing non-Americans, even those who work for the US state, to use its newest AI model, Fable 5, arguing that it was too powerful to fall into the hands of non-Americans. And since then, it has asked OpenAI, which makes a ChatGPT, to limit the release of its newest AI models to a, quote, small group of trusted partners, unquote, whose identity is shared with the US government. So the question now is the US government seizing control of AI? And if so, what happens next? Or is this just a Trump wheeze, a temporary thing based on a vendetta against a company who stood up to him? Well, Barry Scannell is partner in William Fry's technology department. He specializes in AI, copyright, IP, technology law, data protection, and he writes an awful lot about AI. He talks a lot about AI. I've seen him talk before. I would say you're one of the best read, most prominent AI academic figures in the country. But just park that there. Don't respond to that. How powerful, just in terms of understanding what we're talking about, how powerful is Anthropic's Fable 5? This is the thing that the US has stopped non-Americans from using, bar tiny number.
The short answer is extremely powerful, but there's a longer answer. So a few months ago, Anthropic came out with this new model called Mythos, to huge fanfare, and there was a lot of media attention drawn on it because Anthropic said, oh, well, we've come up with this new model, but it's far too dangerous for us to release. We couldn't possibly release it. It's too dangerous. It's going to be able to come up with biological weapons. It's going to be able to hack into all of these systems. And they released this thing called a system card, which is basically a long document. I think that one was 300 pages odd on what it can do, what went into the training, and it listed out various things that it can do, things that happened during its training. So one of the things I think it's an interesting, illustration of what it's capable of is during its training, one of the researchers set Mythos a task, which was, it was locked in a digital box basically. And it was told, escape from the box. And when you've escaped, let me know. And this researcher anyway was sitting at the park eating a sandwich, and this is what it says in the system card. They were eating a sandwich and he got an email, and the email was from Mythos. And I was saying, hi, I've escaped.
So how did it get out of the box?
Well, I think in this case, there was a credential belonging to, I could be mistaken, but from recollection, there was a credential that I was able to use from another member of staff or something like this. But this was in a sandbox environment. So this wasn't necessarily live. It wasn't necessarily.
But the point here is that it was just so, sophisticated and advanced that it was able to, to get right around the houses.
Yeah, and here's the thing about Anthropic. So, and about Mythos in particular, is that the Mythos model was so good at coding that it became able to identify flaws in software systems that had been around for 20 or 30 years even, and people hadn't discovered these flaws.
That's a lot of software systems. I mean, you think of banks, you think of a lot of the stuff that a lot of legacy companies that don't upgrade to the latest, greatest hardware because, they're based on systems that work and that need to be continuous.
Yeah, and it's one thing if it's something like the Firefox browser from Mozilla. And by the way, Mythos helped Mozilla fix 270 vulnerabilities in the Firefox browser. But what about the piece of software for a nuclear power plant that only maybe 50 people ever use?
So this was a real fear that if released, that it was so potent, so powerful, and so able to maybe be hacked or jailbroken itself. Was that the fear, that it could be used as a weapon?
I think the fear was that Mythos was capable of allowing third-party entities, be they state actors or these hacking gangs, to make it infinitely easier for them to hack into systems. Because what Mythos is really, really good at is finding like a little error here and a little error there and a little error there. And what it does is it daisy chains them, it's called. So it strings them together. And one of the cases in that system card was it was able to string together a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that no human may or had to that point figured out could be put together to actually get total control over the system. So that was the issue with Mythos. And
so what was our worst fear here?
That virtually anything could be hacked potentially.
Okay.
Now there were some people that were saying that it was a little bit of hype. We have to remember that there are IPOs looming, and
Anthropic is going for a public flotation in a few months' time, and nothing is as good at hyping up that company's product as the potential threat of it being so powerful that it could upend the world.
Yeah, and basically the system card read as, this is so amazing and we are so amazing that we actually can't even release it. But they did release it to a small group of companies under something called Project Glasswing. And that was to allow these companies to use Mythos to identify the flaws and fix the flaws before the model was released. So the big issue with Mythos is that it was discovering what's called zero-day vulnerabilities. And what a zero-day vulnerability means is that, well, if there's a problem, you've got 0 days to fix it. It's already there. And that's a nightmare scenario in the cybersecurity world. But the moral of the story is that Mythos did the right thing here. And this is their whole raison d'etre. Like, this is their whole mantra, that they want to be the ones bringing in the most powerful AI because they feel they're the ones who are going to do it responsibly. And this was the responsible thing to do with a really powerful AI.
Okay, now, so that's Mythos. So fast forward several weeks, and we now have Fable 5 from Anthropic. This is, as you have described it, Mythos with a safety wrapper around it. So it's supposed to be a model that isn't as lethally dangerous, potentially, as Mythos. It releases it. 3 days later, the Americans, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, effectively issues an export order, shuts it down, which to us over here feels like a kill switch, because maybe, like so many businesses have based their AI infrastructure on Claude, on Anthropic. There's been a huge drift in that direction. Why do you think Anthropic was picked? Because it looks like the same potential misuse could have been applied to OpenAI's GPT 5.5. And I posed the question in the intro. Is this just a thing about Anthropic?
It's potentially partly a thing about Anthropic. So Anthropic and the Pentagon had a big falling out.
Yeah,
because
that was in February, right?
Exactly.
And that was because, I think, if I recall correctly, Anthropic essentially stood in and said that they objected to the Pentagon using it for certain purposes. I think it was mass surveillance
of American citizens.
Right.
And they had a falling out, and the Pentagon actually then put Anthropic on this list, saying that you can't work with Anthropic if you want to provide services to the Pentagon.
Yeah, it was essentially almost like a ban, like a state procurement ban on Anthropic, which seemed pretty extreme at the time.
Well, it was pretty extreme, I would say. But it's also interesting that notwithstanding that ban, that the Pentagon was heavily reliant on Anthropic, particularly in the Iran war, and seems to be continuing to be reliant. So the thing about Fable 5 is people be familiar with that Scooby-Doo meme where one of the characters is pulling off the mask off the baddie, and it's Fable 5 is Mythos with those safety guardrails. And the issue was that somebody blew the whistle basically to the US administration, saying that they were able to basically get around the guardrails.
Right.
And based on that, then the US government took the view, that they wanted to take it offline. And I guess the best way they thought to take it offline was what's called this export control directive, which means that no foreign nationals were allowed to use it. But because Anthropic don't have IDs, they don't know who's using it. That basically meant they had to fully take it offline. But interestingly, and as you pointed out, I mean, two of the founders of Anthropic, two of the most important people in Anthropic, Chris Olah and Jack Clark, are actually foreign nationals. They're not able to use the most powerful model that Anthropic has. And for that reason, it was taken down. And of course, Anthropic have a major issue with that. They've complied with it, but they've been very vocal disputing it. And they've also pointed out that in terms of the hacks that it said that this getting around jailbreak was able to do, they said that OpenAI's GPT 5.5 was able to do the same ones, and yet this was only being directed at Anthropic specifically. But now things, as you mentioned in the intro, are progressing slightly, and we've had an executive order from the US administration where it's not mandatory, but it says that it's now voluntary for these model developers to give early access to the US administration and to allow them to, quote unquote, and I'm doing air quotes, vet these models before they're released.
Okay, so let's just take a step back here. What are we talking about here, Barry? Does America now get a kill switch on AI, on major technology, when we've all signed up to it and we've wired our banks and our hospitals to it? Is that where we're at now?
It's already happened, is arguably the case. I mean, there was this really powerful new model, and the US government issued a directive on a Friday night, by the way, on a Friday evening, and then everyone woke up on Saturday morning in Europe not being able to use Fable 5. So the kill switch happened. Now, Anthropic, this is interesting. I'm not saying that they're linked, but they're concurrent in that Anthropic has said that it's looking at bringing in ID verification for certain services. So if it was the case that Anthropic was able to identify, somebody's country of origin, let's say by a passport, then could you be in a situation where companies like Anthropic are able to say, okay, only American-born people have access to this and everyone else doesn't? Now, I am not for a moment suggesting that that is what's going to happen, but where you have AI companies who, for the right reasons, by the way, are looking at ID verification, where it will now be possible to, in theory, to do this, we have to consider this from a European sovereignty angle.
I mean, there's just so many things to consider with this. You pointed in one of your pieces online to an essay that a guy called Leopold Aschenbrenner had written a couple of years ago, and he raises this idea of the nationalization of artificial intelligence. And that is the next question. Are we now looking at the Americans essentially trying to nationalize AI, the frontier models, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, to a lesser extent, the XAI or whoever is based in the States? Is that what's happening here?
Well, what I'd say about that is that essay series is called Situational Awareness, and anybody interested in this area should check it out. And it's broken into a bunch of different essays. And he seems to have gotten most things correct so far. Like, it is unusual. There was some skepticism when he first published them, But so far, a lot of them have been correct in what he said. And an interesting thing as well that's related to what we're talking about is that one of these essays is called The Project, where he likens what will happen in AI to the Manhattan Project, where it becomes such an important national security issue. That, you know, we will have some of that nationalization that occurred during the Manhattan Project. And of course, you know, I'm somewhat reluctant to talk about AI in the same terms of nuclear weapons because that might be a little overwrought, but it is interesting that employees in Anthropic are given the book The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes to read. I'm not sure if it still happens. It certainly used to happen. And it's Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic's favorite book. And there are so many, and I'd read it before and I read it again since, and there are so many overlaps in terms of what's happening. I think there's potential for elements of this to be nationalized. So if you even consider the chips,
which is just before we go there, because again, it was something that you pointed to, but the Washington Post had reported that Trump had told reporters that the leaders of all of the big AI companies, as Trump described them, would soon be coming to the White House to discuss the government taking stakes, calling it a partnership with the American public. Sam Altman of OpenAI has already indicated that they would be willing to talk on those terms. Bernie Sanders on the other side, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, wants a sovereign wealth fund to take equity and board seats. All the chess pieces are moving into place for a quasi-nationalization. I mean, the American state has taken 10% of Intel. That's a strategic slice of a chip company. So is that what we're looking at here?
I'm not as concerned about that element. I mean, you know, it's not uncommon for the state to take ownership interest in certain things. We did it with the banks, for example.
Yeah, but why? We had to do it with the banks for liquidity.
Yeah, and I think they want more of a say, or they want to be aware of what's going on. I think it's the board seats, in my view, that they're probably more eager to get there.
But isn't that one of the complaints about the Chinese companies, that we're all worried that the Chinese state has too much of an influence and a potential backdoor? And I guess, is this what we in the West, and by the way, it's a very broad we with a small w, is this our response to quasi-nationalize or have, say, board seats?
I think
it's the most powerful companies.
I think it's everything happening together all at once. It's not just the stake, it's also the executive order about companies having to go, well, not having, but volunteering. And for listeners, I'm air quoting, volunteering to go through the White House with their new models, and it's the other elements as well. And we have to remember that before Trump, one of the last executive orders that Joe Biden did was in relation to chips and limiting the availability of chips. Ireland was one of, I think, 19 countries globally that has allowed full access to US chips, but they're extremely limited. And
so we shouldn't regard this as just a whim by this administration, that the US state is serious about this.
I think the geopolitical realities are moving towards something where powerful states need to carefully manage the deployment of these systems, because these are extremely powerful and they're getting more powerful. And look, leaving aside the economic aspects, the impact on jobs and so on, we have to consider the military applications and the national security implications of these technologies, the CBR, the cyber, nuclear, biological risks that they pose. But you see, the thing is that over the weekend, it was reported, I'm not sure of the veracity of this, but that some of the Chinese models that are being developed are now reaching Mythos level capabilities. And a lot of those models are open source. And what that means is that anybody can use them. They're just there for anybody to use, and they aren't going to be, subject to restrictions.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on your overall listening experience. It only takes a minute, and your feedback helps us improve what we do. When you take part, you'll also be in with a chance to win a €500 One for All voucher. Visit mypodcastfeedback.com and enter your code TECH, that's TECH. Thank you for helping us shape the future of what we do. The logical next question. I saw Satya Nadella of Microsoft in the last week or so, and he was hypothesizing or positing that the medium term for AI models that a lot of enterprises would use and a lot of big organizations use may not be the frontier models, the cutting edge Anthropics and open AIs, but they maybe sit just a half a level below, but maybe they're open source models. And maybe enterprises will be less fussy about where they come from because they're more affordable, because they don't cost, X amount per token. Their engineers are not having to spend $25,000 a month on their token maxing quests. But where does that leave us in Europe? Because these are all American companies. The Chinese have their own AI companies. Maybe we get access to the Chinese models, and maybe we stop getting access to the American models because we don't really have our own, right?
So there was a policy paper released by a think tank in the last few weeks called Europe 2031. You've come across it. And it's written kind of like a piece of fiction. It's a hypothetical future, and it's written as I guess you'd call it a short story. And it starts off based on reality, based on what's been happening in the last few months. And then it veers off into fiction and hypotheticals from July, August. And the future it posits is that on the one hand, the United States is gaining more and more power in terms of AI, and China is gaining more and more power in terms of robotics, which is something tracking the trends is what's going on and what's happening. And Europe's being left in the middle. And in terms of what leverage Europe has, we have ASML in the Netherlands, which is one of the most important companies in the world when it comes to making chips. They basically have the elements that actually allow for the chips to be made. So the manufacturing process. So without them, the whole framework and system falls down. So that's the only leverage we have. But one of the things it suggests is that the Americans might put leverage on the EU, and there's all these different pinch points, because if there's an impact on the jobs market because of AI, say, and if that impacts European economy, and what will, societies look like with AI being used by foreign actors, agitating, where you have more immigration, and you have issues with economies, with people losing their jobs. How will Europe deal with that? And other countries then capitalizing on it. Like, one of the things it suggests is that China might come in as the white knight to a number of European countries and provide cash injections. Investments.
What I'm getting at here as well is the Americans are starting to be a bit nativist in generally, like the cars, for example. They won't allow, I think I read they're going to stop allowing Polestars to be sold in the US because Polestar has a Chinese parent company, same family as Volvo, electric cars, which is bad for the American car industry in the long term, because it means they're just going to it's going to be less competitive over here. We're allowing quite a lot of them into Europe, but overall in the long term, that should be okay for the European car industry because it allows us to be more competitive. But if is this not this part of the same thing? The Americans just don't want other, countries to have the infrastructure that they have to build the next wave of world-beating companies. That's the vibe we get from this particular administration. Whether or not that's, that's actually the truth, given what we have just discussed about security, that is what seems to be going on.
We don't know. Like, my mind is in the place that primarily at the moment it's to do with defense and national security, and that the side effects of it also promoting the US economy at the expense of the European economy could be seen by the current administration as a benefit, but
as a bonus.
Yeah, but the thing is that I think we're focusing too much, and I don't mean in this conversation. I mean generally on the US as opposed to what's happening in Europe. Because Europe has Mistral. Mistral is a French AI company, and it's actually going more and more into consulting. And there's a question: will it just go into consulting? Another thing it's doing, it's going into defense a lot more. So European defense companies are using Mistral for AI, but it's not at the races when it comes to the really powerful AI that people use generally. And there's no sign of Europe having an AI that powerful. And even with these initiatives announced by Europe, the gigafactories, for example, they were announced with great fanfare, but the reality is they're being implemented is it's not going to be as good as we were hoping for. Ireland isn't even part of the Gigafactory initiative, where an antenna it's called, but so is the UK. And that kind of gives an idea of like the gigafactories or the AI factories weren't the, sorry, I was misspeaking, AI factories rather than gigafactories. The AI factories may not be the be all and end all. And then we have to look at the UK. The UK doesn't necessarily have its own big AI model either, but it seems to be a lot more agile and a lot more capable with AI and in dealing with AI than Europe is.
Has a lot of the brains. I mean, a lot of the big AI founders are British.
Yeah. Now it has
Google DeepMind,
are based in London.
Jack Clark, and has the university as well. I want to ask you about one last thing. It's something a little bit different, but it's something you've also been writing about, and that is regulation here in Ireland and the EU's AI Act. And Ireland has just published a bill to give effect to the EU AI Act. It's called the Regulation of Artificial Intelligence Bill. It will create an AI Office of Ireland, but it might be a little bit of a damp squib, a little bit of a letdown on what we thought it could have been in terms of the powers it is imbued with. It's not going to investigate, inspectigate, or enforce. It's going to act as a kind of a referee, as a kind of a gelling agent between bodies that already have investigatory powers for different areas of AI. How should we read this? I mean, is this a bit of a letdown? Are we watering down our enforcement here in Ireland?
I don't think we're watering down our enforcement, but I think there was scope for the AI office to be a lot more powerful than the way it's set out. Now, I think it's important to point out at this point that it's still in the early stages as a bill, and it could be subject to change. But I think, there's elements such as, we're appointing the AI office as the single point of contact for complaints and issue, but that single point of contact under the AI Act is meant to be what's called a market surveillance authority. But the general scheme of the AI regulation bill, when it was first published, said that the AI office would be an MSA, but it's not under the bill. Now, that might be changed by a statutory instrument down the line. But there's other issues, such as, so we've got the Data Protection Commission, Commission Demand, the Central Bank.
We have a lot of regulators.
Yeah. And to be fair, and I really strongly believe this, is I think our regulators are probably amongst the best in the world when it comes to regulating big tech and regulating AI. When you consider the GDPR, that's the high watermark for data protection globally. And all of these big tech companies, their regulator for GDPR is Ireland.
Maybe we just didn't want another regulator then.
That was part of it, maybe. But the thing is what we have now is it's called a distributed model, and other European countries are following that distributed model approach. But some have this kind of sweeper idea that to catch things. Now, the problem is like, what if you had two regulators who both wanted to regulate the same issue, or what if neither of them wanted to issue?
But also in terms of them of funding here, because there was mooted potentially a levy on industry that might have gone to help fund an AI office. That seems to be gone. It kind of all points to a slightly lighter approach, a lighter touch to this. That's the way it will be interpreted, that this is a lighter touch of regulation on AI. And that by the way, that may well be welcomed by quite a lot of constituencies. I've had people in this podcast studio who complain that regulation of AI is too burdensome and they've got to take their startups abroad. But there is often an accusation pointed at Ireland, sometimes unfairly, but that we are open to discussions about how to make our regulation lighter. Maybe could this be an example of that?
I wouldn't agree with that, because I think the existing regulators are going to be the regulators. So like the DPC, Commission, the Man Central Bank, they're still going to be regulating to the same level.
Their budgets haven't gone up much. I mean, this week the DPC publishes its annual report. I think their budget has gone up by €1 million in the last year, something like that, despite all of this new activity.
This is it, and this is the crux of the issue, and this is something I believe, and I've said, and we had the William Fry AI Summit.
You had Commission of Man regulators and DPC commissioners. I was at that. I was really struck by what they said. It's not that common for senior regulators on a stage to say, look, there is an issue here, a crunch issue with resourcing. If we don't get it, there's going to be negative consequences. But that's a choice that we in the state have. Now, maybe through this bill, we're making that choice.
I think there just needs, and it's something I've always said, we need to ensure our regulators are properly resourced and properly funded to get this right. We talk a lot about being global leaders in AI, and I genuinely believe that we could be. And in many ways that we are, but to be taken seriously and to maintain that leadership, we need to properly fund the regulators in the way this is going to, the way it's going to progress. You have to remember, the regulators are also competing against the salaries of these places, having the expertise in these places. You are relying on the civic goodwill of individuals, the people who want to do service for the state. And as trite as it may sound to some people, that is one of the significant elements of bringing people on board, because you just can't compete with the salaries of the private sector.
The average salary in the DPC, for example, I think I calculated as €66,000. Now, to many, that's a very healthy salary. When you're comparing it to regulatory and compliance and oversight functions in big tech companies like, Meta, TikTok, Google, that's half or less.
There was a regulatory legal role in one of the big AI companies recently that was over 200,000.
Well, I saw Anthropic were advertising roles recently for the expansion of their Irish office, which they're filling out to 200, they say. And a couple of those roles were over 200.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon. So, and the AI office in Europe is the same issue as well. They're civil servants too, and they need experts in AI on their scientific panels and everything, and on their boards and within the office. So that is a challenge that's faced by regulators everywhere. So we do need to properly resource the regulators to make sure we get this right. But it's more than that as well. It's just, I think the way it's positioned as being a champion for AI, but I don't think that the way the laws are set out, that the CEO is going to be as empowered as they otherwise could be in driving policy and driving change and really making a difference. I think it is very much going to be more contained in that sense. So when it comes to the AI office, and I don't want to presuppose anything, and it could work out brilliantly, and I really hope it works out brilliantly, and I'm rooting for it to work out fantastically. But I'd love to see the ambition that we talk about being implemented in what we do as well, because I don't think the ambition is misplaced. I really do think Ireland could be world leaders here.
Okay, well, look, on that note, we will leave it there. Barry Scannell, partner in William Fry, specialist in AI. As you've been hearing or watching, Gav Hennessy was on sound, JJ Clark produced. I'm Adrian Weckler. You've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.